Hey everybody, it's Sean.
And it's Cynda.
And we are Cockeyed Optimist, and welcome back to another little Founding Father celebration mini-sode.
Birthday episode.
Yes. Today, who are we going to be talking about? Cynda?
Today is Thomas Paine's birthday.
Thomas Paine, a name that I feel like a lot of us remember from our schooling years about the Revolutionary War, but maybe we don't know too much about. And a guy who I've recently discovered leaves behind a rather complicated political legacy, at least in my opinion.
Well, I don't feel like we learned about him at all.
No?
We just heard the name. That's it. We didn't learn really anything in history class, so
No, that's
we're
too
learning
bad.
now.
Okay. Well, before we get into talking a little bit about Thomas Paine, are there any band updates that we can share with the people watching?
Well, I will be recording vocals this week. So, yeah, our first song that we're going to be releasing in, wow, 7 years.
7 years.
Yeah. So, yeah, I will be working on vocals this week.
So if you feel up for it, please send some prayers her way so that her voice is strong and clear, and that the tracks are going to be amazing. I know they are going to be. I've heard her practicing.
And if you want to know when those songs are released, go to our website at cockeydoptimist.net, sign up for the email, and yeah, we'll let you know.
Yeah, you'll be amongst the first to know when this will be available for you to have, because you will be able to have it, not just be able to stream it. And now, let's get into a little bit about Thomas Paine.
T-Pain?
T-Pain. Wow. You know what's actually ironic? First, to get us started, we are actually going to delve into a little bit of biographical information, my nice little red book here. When he was born, his last name was spelled Paine. Like pain. Like actual pain. So that's...
Did he add the E for...
The E was added later on.
It's like shop E.
Yes,
like,
exactly.
We're making it look more fancy by adding the E.
Mm-hmm.
And with an E.
Yes.
And with an E.
Yes, indeed. So Thomas Paine, not an American, actually an Englishman, born this day in 1737, and like I said, born Thomas Paine. Wow, the English just not very creative with the name spelling on that one, but very creative with other spellings of other things. That's just cheating at Scrabble, people. Came to the U.S. in 1774, a bit of a late bloomer to the revolutionary cause, as it were, with the assistance of Ben Franklin, which I found to be a nice connection there. Obviously, we talked about Ben Franklin being the grandfather of our country. Well,
that was our last episode,
yes.
Our last mini birthday episode was
Yes.
Ben Franklin.
And so I just find it very interesting that with his help, Thomas Paine came to America. But eventually, Paine, after the war, did go back to England where he continued his revolutionary writings. During that time, he also caught the ire of certain members of the English establishment and had to flee to France, which also happened to coincide with the French Revolution. And while in France, used the very same kind of revolutionary ideals that he would espouse in his works, like Common Sense, which we're going to get into in a little bit, for the French Revolution. He was a big supporter of the revolutionary cause, and there are many reasons why he would support the revolutionary cause. However, an interesting little tidbit here that I discovered. In 1793, despite the fact that he was friendly to the revolutionary cause, a certain faction within the revolutionary government deemed him an enemy, and he was arrested in 1793 and thrown in prison, and was due to be executed at the guillotine if not for one small clerical error. Because he was so important, he was constantly receiving contact from various diplomats. He was also receiving a lot of visits at the prison, so his cell door was often left open. Now, when they would go around the prison to mark off the people due for execution, they would take a piece of chalk and mark the door with an X on a specific side of the door. The person that came to put the X's on the doors mistakenly put it on the opposite side of where it was supposed to be originally placed. So, when it came due for him to be executed, literally the day of his execution, his cell door was open, thus covering the chalk mark and eventually saving his life.
Wow.
That was a...
This is like Dickensian
yeah,
here.
it is.
This is like a tale of two cities
Yeah.
where there it's a literal swap because they look identical. Here it's like the door is open and the chalk isn't seen. And by the way,
it's a very...
What kind of dumb French people do we have marking the execution in something that you can wipe away with your hand as chalk? The French Revolution, what an utterly stupid...
What an utter clustercuss.
It was insane.
Yeah.
Led by literally a lot of crazy people.
Yes. But
and clearly very stupid if we're marking chalk.
Yeah. Well, obviously, it was on the
outside of the door.
But
how
still...
stupid do you have to be? Like, the door swings in, it swings out. And then who's leaving the door open to prisons?
Yeah.
If you're actually trying to keep someone in prison. It doesn't make it...
that
was God.
Yeah.
That was God.
Yeah. So he wasn't executed, and with the help of people like James Monroe, amongst other people who were ambassadors to France, as well as people within the French government not wanting to catch the ire of the burgeoning United States of America, he was eventually released, and he returned to the United States in 1802 at the invitation of Thomas Jefferson. However, he did die 7 years later on June 8th, 1809, and this is a bit of a sad part. Upon his death, his body was not given a very ceremonious burial, despite his influence in the American Revolution. He was given sort of a plain burial, and his body would eventually be later exhumed and taken to England for a more hero's burial. Being a native son of England, there were certain people within that country that thought he should be buried in his ancestral homeland. However, something happened to his body.
Well, why wasn't he given a ceremonial burial?
Nobody really knows.
No one knows?
Apparently, by the end of his life, he was also rather poor and destitute. Not really sure why that is. There's a lot of conflicting information that I was able to find. Probably lost a lot of station because he went back to England. Probably because he found himself in France. Who's really to say? But his bones were exhumed, taken back to England, and in the possession of someone. However, that person, name escapes me at the moment, actually passed away before actually being able to give him a proper burial. And to this day, nobody really knows where the body of Thomas Paine actually is. Many people claim to have...
Or do they?
Well, many people claim to have parts of him, like his hand, his skull. There are a lot of people that claim to possess bones of Thomas Paine, but nobody knows what happened to his body to this day. So that, in and of itself, is a bit of the triumph and tragedy of the life of Thomas Paine. Now, I think we can start to talk a little bit about the overall concepts that the man stood for and some of the things that he was a champion of. First and foremost, we know him as a writer. Mm-hmm. Common Sense being his most well-known work, but he also wrote a lot of other works, one of which is The Age of Reason. He also wrote other things called The American Crisis, which he actually wrote, I believe, during his time in the French prison. Also, parts of Age of Reason were written during his imprisonment as well. Very Paul-esque kind of writing.
And it sounds very French.
Yes, it does.
You know, something I feel like from watching the John Adams movie, the
HBO miniseries.
Yeah, miniseries, that it was very interesting to me. And I know it's a movie, so it takes artistic liberty, but it sort of felt like John Adams, being the ambassador to England, started to get a little too English, and Thomas Jefferson, being the ambassador to France, started to become a little too French.
Yeah.
So it's almost like any time that Americans start to spend too much time in Europe, they start to lose some of their American ideals.
They take on a stink, as it were.
the rights of man sort of goes along with the French Constitution.
Yes. But he stood for a lot of really interesting things, which makes him, in my opinion, have a very complicated political legacy. First and foremost, he was a strong abolitionist, which is actually something he shares with Alexander Hamilton. They were both very much not a fan of the institution of slavery, and he even wrote a piece called about African slavery in America, and it basically uses a lot of his deistic natural rights beliefs, natural rights which we see obviously enshrined in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, as reason for standing against the institution of slavery. He was also an early advocate for things like social welfare programs, things like government subsidies for families and those in old age. So what we know as Social Security got a lot of its first ideas from Thomas Paine. He was strongly opposed to what is referred to as fiat currency. Now, fiat currency, what is that? You know, I know, you probably don't know. Fiat currency is basically our current money. It is money that is not backed by gold or silver or some kind of hard asset. Essentially, it's paper money that its value is basically agreed upon and doesn't really have much real value, as it were. Now,
and so it's ironic that he's opposed to any form of fiat, but advocates for social welfare, social security.
Yeah.
Basically.
Sure, we can just use that phrase.
Because how else are you going to pay for it if there is... I mean, you would just have to straight up just amass tons and tons and tons of gold.
Yeah.
That's the only way.
Yeah, pretty much. And so this is why I actually hold the opinion that he leaves behind a very complicated political legacy, because it is common to see both left-wing and right-wing punditry centered around ideas that he put forth in his work. His belief in deism, that he believed that there was one God who was creator of everything, but you discovered him more through observation and reason, has always been very interesting to me and a very common thing amongst the founding fathers. But at the same time, from his social welfare advocacy to his feelings on economics and the hereditary rule that we see in monarchies, it makes for a very interesting pulled one way, pulled another kind of thing.
Because I saw on Wikipedia, it was like he was a humanist and secularist, you know?
Mm.
And I want to push back on that.
Yeah, I don't even know which part you're going to read, but I would agree with you.
Because these are his words. Not my word, not Wikipedia's words about him.
And we are reading from Common Sense.
We are reading from Common Sense. But where, say some, is the king of America? I'll tell you, friend, he reigns above, and doth not make havoc of mankind like the royal brute of Britain. Yet that we may not appear to be defective even in earthly honors, let a day be solemnly set apart for proclaiming the charter, let it be brought forth, placed on the divine law, the word of God. Let a crown be placed thereon, by which the world may know that so far as we approve of monarchy, that in America the law is king. We're saying the divine law is the word of God, and then we're putting a crown upon that.
Mm.
And so he's saying, like, the only king is the king above.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, he detests monarchy.
Yes, absolutely.
Thomas Paine, being British, hates the British so much.
Yeah.
Like, it's actually kind of hilarious and awesome at the same time. Just the utter disdain for the monarchical system of Britain that sometimes I would be reading Common Sense and I'm actually laughing out loud because it's just that like much vitriol towards monarchy. And he also shows a very clear knowledge of biblical text because in Common Sense there is a whole section on Israel and their desire for a king. And so his his basic framing is the Israelites sinned in asking for a king. And he brings up the story of the Israelites demanding a king, and they asked Samuel, make a king over us. And Samuel prayed unto the Lord, and the Lord said to Samuel, hearken to the voice of the people in what they say to thee, for they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. And then he brings up that basically God says this is the kind of king that's going to reign over you. Someone who's going to take your sons to be in his army, take your daughters to work in the bakeries. The king is going to take some of your land for his fees. Because you've rejected me, God, I'll let you have a king. And so Thomas Paine clearly shows a knowledge of biblical, and it ends that sort of section. He brings up, pray for the servants unto the Lord that we die not, for we have added unto our sins this evil, to ask a king. And so he's directly comparing having a king being evil.
Yeah. And that's not for nothing, but that's a take that I've heard theologians say today, that you could think of Israel's original sin as much earlier than that, but it's like the want of a king. Yeah.
So the idea that, he was this secular guy, I'm like,
No,
I don't
know.
I don't really agree with that. And these are his words. I'm not putting my spin on it.
No, and I would take his secularism as more of I see him not considering himself a Christian and not really much of a fan of organized religion. But then again, he sort of takes every single organized church to task in some of his writings.
And he takes the Quakers to task, especially. He just rails against them hardcore, because he's basically like, oh, you guys act like you're all pacifistic and you stay neutral and I'm not going to fight in the war, but then why are you writing political statements on behalf of the king?
Yeah.
If you really believe this, then stop being hypocrites and just stay out of it. Let us do our revolution thing and you shut your mouth. That's basically what he says to the Quakers.
Yeah.
He doesn't... What I love about Thomas Paine is he doesn't pull any punches.
No, he does not. He
says exactly what he means. And even what you said, he has a lot of sometimes contradictory ideas. He just starts laying out his ideas. Well, I had this idea, I had that idea.
No.
He says what he means, and he means what he says.
Yeah, and him having contradictory ideas, I don't even necessarily consider to be a bad thing. I actually consider it to be, in a way, part of his genius. Because one of the interesting things about all these ideas that he holds, and Common Sense is obviously famous for a reason. It was a text that galvanized the revolutionary cause here in America. But it sets forth so many well-articulated and well-thought-out ideas that whether or not through our lens today they could be seen as contradictory, you can't argue with his argument for them.
And I think the idea of actually saying what you mean and meaning what you say and being willing to say it is very American.
Yes.
There's often talk with our founding fathers about how much they can't stand the European intrigue. And in America, it's very common sense. Let's just talk like normal people, lay it all out. This should make common sense to people of every, I would say class, but in America, we're very anti-classist.
Every walk of life.
Every walk of life. This should be common knowledge, common sense. Let's have a fair and open debate and discuss our ideas and not play games with each other.
Yep.
And I love, he's so passionate.
What do we think we could punctuate with?
I think I'll leave with two little lines from Common Sense that kind of connect to each other.
All right.
He says, wherefore the present time is the true time for establishing it. Meaning our union, okay? He says, The present time, likewise, is that peculiar time which never happens to a nation but once, the time of forming itself into a government. Most nations have let slip the opportunity, and by that means have compelled to receive laws from their conquerors instead of making laws for themselves. He talks about a very biblical idea called a kairos moment. That would be in the Greek. And the kairos moment means a now moment, a now time, and this can only happen now. And so when he talks about, this is the only time that this can happen. We either do this revolution thing and we take out our British oppressors now, or it's never going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And to end with the same kind of notion of the kairos moment, we have it in our power to begin the world over again. A situation similar to the present hath not happened since the days of Noah until now.
Wow.
America is founded just like the days of Noah. Where the days of Noah, it floods the world, wipes it clean, start over. America was founded as a start over. We're doing this from scratch. And so I think Thomas Paine took a hold of his kairos moment to spread common sense to America. And I think it's time to bring common sense back.
Yes, I agree. And with that, we thank you all for joining us in this little celebration of Founding Father Thomas Paine. Thank you, Thomas. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
You leave behind a complicated legacy, but what great person doesn't leave behind a complicated legacy? If you enjoyed this, please do subscribe or follow us wherever you're watching it. Give it a like, but most importantly, share it so more people can learn about the Founding Fathers of our nation. We'll see you next time when we celebrate Abraham Lincoln on his birthday. And until then, I'm Sean.
I'm Cynda.
And we thank you all for watching. We're Cockeyed Optimist. We'll see you next time.